Hey everybody, welcome back to Northernlion Plays Slay the Spire, except it's not Northernlion playing Slay the Spire. It's a special occasion, because check that. Don't look at that one. Don't look at this one either. Or that one for that matter. Or this one. Look at that! Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. You can tell, 12:13 a.m. on a Thursday night. This was not one that I recorded. And people sometimes, they're like, I feel ripped off that you didn't record this. I understand that feeling. Simultaneously, I want to play, we got this weird dichotomy where I want to play Slay the Spire all the time, but I don't want to record all the time because my voice will be shredded and I'm going to sound like 70-year-old Mickey Rourke by the time I'm 35. So I've been playing in my downtime. We won as the Defect on Ascension level 20. It's real. What does that mean? It means I'm uniquely qualified to rate every single card in the Defect collection. That's right. It's another classic. Northernlion rates every card as X class. Now the Silent, one day you'll get yours. We already did the Ironclad. I learned something from doing the Ironclads video, which is that I should talk faster. Here we go. Let me give you my preamble. First off, I am bad at Slay the Spire, or at least not the best at Slay the Spire. The last one got me responses. It got me subtweeted on the Slay the Spire Reddit. First, people were writing essays in response. You might think that annoys me. I actually find it excellent. You know, this can drive discussion. And first off, it helps me learn when people point out my own mistakes, obviously. But if it helps other people learn what cards are good, what cards I overrate, what cards I underrate, more power to you. You know, I'm happy with that. And similarly, any YouTube or Twitch streamer that wants to do a response video to this video, fine by me. Especially if you're, like, demonstrably better than me. I do it for entertainment value. I do it for educational purposes for people who are, like, worse than me. You know? I might not be a professor emeritus at Harvard and Slay the Spire, but I'm at least, like, a high school level teacher. Not to insult high school teachers. I'm just saying, well, hey, I'm either insulting them or myself, so choose wisely. Anyway, rate them on a scale from 0 to 5, or 1 to 5, which honestly sometimes becomes 0 to 6. 5 being like a superstar card, almost always take. 1 being like a I never take this card, and everything else being justified as we go. Let's just get started. Defend. What do you say about Defend? I mean, it's a 1... or a 2, you can't take this card at any other opportunities, and in fact, it's one of your earliest removal targets along with Strike. I mean, it's better than Strike, I would say, in a Defect deck, but you can do a lot of damage without playing Strikes, and you can get a lot of block without playing Defense as the Defect, so, I don't know, this is kind of like a question mark out of 5, to be honest. Dual Cast. I think Dual Cast, I am going to give it a 3 out of 5. And that, to some people, will seem like an overrating, I think. And it's not even that it requires an upgrade. Here's my reasoning for dual cast. In the early game, being able to dual cast a lightning orb will put a big dent in a lot of enemies' HPs, and is one of the ways that the Defect starting deck can actually kill enemies consistently. Because, you know, your zaps by themselves, they take a long time to do it. Dual cast works fine on a Frost Orb. You know, it could take you from, 4 Frost to, or 4 block to 10 maybe. Or 2 block to 10, I should say. And then on top of that, I really think it shines if you manage to have a Dark Orb. Realistically, if you have 1 Dark Orb and you can get it up to 40 or 50, a dual cast takes that up to 80 or 100, which can really neuter a lot of the bosses that you face on the first floor. I think the only time this really stays great in the late game and scales well is if you have something like an Electrodynamics, so that it does 16 damage at least to all enemies, or, you know, you've got enough focus coming in that a dual cast continues to give you good value to play. But I think early on, this is like mission critical in the deck, so I'll give it a 3. Strike, I mean, it's a 1. It's 6 damage for 1 damage. Or for 1 attack, I should say. Zap, I'm going to go, for 1 energy, I meant to say. Zap, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 2. And I give it a 2 because it's important. You need to play the Zaps in order to play the dual cast more than once. It also gets substantially better on an upgrade. Most of the time, you're still going to be happy to play it for 0. A lot of the time, you're happy to play it for 1, to be honest with you. I would go so far as to say, I would even maybe add one more zap to my deck, depending on what I'm trying to do. But for the most part, you're aware if you play as the Defect, you're going to at least have one zap in your run for almost the entirety of your run. It's very important early. I'm going to give it a 2. Ball Lightning. Very interesting card. I'd be inclined to give this one a 3 right out of the gate. With the added asterisk, I actually think this is like a 4 early on. Late in a run, depending on the kind of run that you got going on, I don't think you care so much about 7 damage and maybe evoking 1 lightning. You probably have better things to worry about. But early on, the ability to get minimum 10 damage on the turn that you play it for 1 energy, plus it does 3 extra damage every turn from that point onwards, bare minimum. That's with default focus. And also, the more of these you play, the closer you get to evoking orbs. So it actually could be as much as 15 damage with base focus. And it gets there pretty realistically. So I think Ball Lightning is a 3 or a 4. 3, somewhere between 3 and 4 early. Late, it loses a little efficacy. Barrage, I'm inclined to give this a 2, to be honest with you. I will take it. Let me give you my reasoning for this, okay? Upgraded, it's probably going to do 12 damage for you. It might do 18. 18 damage is pretty good. But you can do better than that. Like, if we're going to talk upgraded cards, most of the time I would probably rather have an upgraded Melter, which could, considering some of the enemies you fight, could do as much as like 70 damage if an enemy has like 60 block, which is not unlikely to happen on the second floor, for example. But my problem with Barrage, and I don't think it's a bad card, I just think it's a card that's hard to justify taking outside of maybe the early game when you really need the damage, is if you have a lot of orb slots that are full, and you can have as many as 10, which could make this do 40 damage, but wouldn't you rather spend that energy elsewhere? Maybe I'm ignorant here. I am not necessarily. I mean, I play basically exclusively Frost Focus builds and Claw as the Defect, so I'm coming from a position of ignorance. But I would almost always rather, if we got a lot of orb slots, throw out something that pushes the orbs ahead. Throw out a Cool Headed, a Cold Snap, a Ball Lightning, a Zap, etc., etc. Maybe not a Zap over a Barrage, but you get the idea. So I find it a little underwhelming, but I do take it early on. Just the ability to do extra damage early, and it helps out against enemies that have plated armor. So there's some extra use case here. Beam Cell's a tough one for me. I'm going to give it a 2, and this is maybe controversial. And it's so controversial, I'm even rethinking it already at the present moment. I do take it. It works extremely well in all for 1 decks. And applying Vulnerable is massive. I mean, I would say it's as valuable as weak, maybe more valuable if you have a build that's focused on attacking. And 2 Vulnerable for 0 is amazing. Now, the damage is underwhelming. And the real problem with this card, in my opinion, is that it gets hard countered by enemies that have Artifact, which become increasingly common. Whoa, my chair needs to be oiled. I give that a 0, that incredibly annoying high-pitched sound. So I think that this loses effectiveness pretty quickly as the game goes on, but I'm sticking with the 2, but, with a little wink and a nudge, like a 3 could be in order here. Charge Battery's going to get another 2. I used to think this was like maybe the best common as the Defect. The only thing that has made me change my opinion of that is the fact that whenever I would pay an energy for a block, I would almost always rather pay energy for a Frost with some other effect, like damage from Cold Snap or draw from Cool Headed. That doesn't mean it's bad, and I would probably say that if you took an aggregate of my last 30 runs as the Defect, I probably at least have one of these in my deck 50% of the time or more. But I definitely think it falls off as the game progresses, and the energy is good, but it's inconsistent. It's only slightly better than a basic defend, plus the energy alongside of it. So I no longer think this is that good, but I think it is takeable situationally, and it's always nice to shore up your defense, particularly as you get to the second floor. So I'll give it a 2. Claw. I didn't know coming into this what I was going to give this card. I think I'm going to give it a 4. But it's a 4 with the added caveat that it has to be pretty early on. Like, this is, if I get Claw as my first, as an option in my first card reward, I'm going to take it just because it's early enough that I can use it to define my run. I like cards that make other cards stronger. The more Claws you take, the stronger your deck becomes. It works well with Shuriken, it works well with Kunai, it works well with Ornamental Fan. It also is one of the rare attacks that it pings off of itself, basically. So if you get 2 or 3 of these in your deck, it really could give you the kind of sustenance and growth against an early boss that could take you there. It is hard to make it work on A20. I haven't had great luck with that. You know, you either play holograms or rebounds, or you hope for an all-for-one, but usually that doesn't show up until your first boss. I think this is a 3 with a +1 for it's like one of the more fun ways to play the deck. So, I don't know. I could see a lot of people giving this card a 2. I could see a lot of people giving this card a 5. I might be slightly on the higher end. Cold Snap, I'm going to give another 2. You know, it's not my favorite Frost card, but 6 damage, 2 block. It's pretty good. Not quite at Iron Wave levels, but it's 6 damage and then 2 block per turn. So there's not much to say about this card. I'm never excited to pick it up, but once I get focus going, you know, if you can get an upgraded defrag, all of a sudden it's 6 damage and 4 block per turn for the rest of combat, basically. So, you know, it relies on other cards to make it better, which is probably true of a lot of cards in the game. Yeah, I would say it's a 2. Most of the time early on, I'd rather have Ball Lightning, but Cold Snap maybe towards the end of the game, block becomes a little bit more valuable. Compile Driver, I know I'm giving out just endless 2s, but I'm going to give this a 2 as well. It is, in my opinion, better than Barrage. If there's one character I respect draw on, it's the Defect. This has the detriment of not doing as much damage, but realistically, you're only going to take this card in a situation, in my opinion at least, where you are going to draw at least 2. Like you have a Frost Orb and a Lightning Orb is probably the most likely. 7 damage and 2 draw for 1 energy. It's okay. It might even be really good if you're hoping to draw into stuff that gives you more draw or draw into stuff that gives you, 0 cost. But anyway, these are cards that, for the most part, I'm not too excited about. Cool-Headed is somewhere between a 2 and a 4. If you have a Frost Focus build, this might even be a 5. It's one of my favorite cards to play if I have a Frost Focus build. Like, if you can get... I mean, this is not unrealistic. If you can get 6 Focus up via a Defrag and maybe a Bias Cognition, all of a sudden, you know, this is 8 block and 1 draw, or 2 draw, and it's going to push your Orbs all ahead one, which will probably evoke something. So, I think that this is one of those cards that's very unexciting to look at, but when you play it, it's really, really helpful. But you do need the archetype well, I don't know if you need the archetype, but you need the scaffolding to work for you, in my opinion. Like, a Cool-Headed early on is pretty meaningless. We're talking from the perspective of Ascension level 20 here. If you're playing on Ascension level 0, sure, if you play, like, 2 Cool-Headeds, all of a sudden, you know, none of the enemies on the first floor are doing much damage to you, but... You know, there's some enemies on the first floor that do like 30 damage to you on the second turn. So this becomes much harder to play until the late game. But in the late game, if you have a focus build, I love it. And I'll take like 3 or 4 of these in a 30-card deck easily. Did he just say 30-card deck? What is he... Look, it's how I play the game, okay? Go for the eyes. I have to give it like a 2-. And I know that's not fair. But... It's Beam Cell, but with a less consistent effect. I just can't be happy. I mean, to play it for free, you get 4 damage, which is not nothing, but it's not much. But if you're not getting the weakness on the enemy, then this becomes substantially less interesting. I will still take 1 or 2 if I'm rolling a 0 cost, you know, a Claw deck with all for 1, for example, but I mean, I think a 2 is fair. Oh, I have clicked off the screen. Whoa! There we go. My bad. Hologram. Unupgraded, I think it's like maybe, and this is controversial. Unupgraded, I think it's like a 1. 3 block is nothing. I'm not saying I'd rather have 0, but especially when you consider all the enemies that like apply frailty to you. This is like 2 block sometimes. And then you get to put a card in your hand from your discard pile. The 2 most common times to use this, and this is the use case where I'll allow that an unupgraded hologram is pretty decent. If you can play like, if you played a Hyper Beam last turn for 26 damage to all enemies, and you can hologram Hyper Beam and wipe out even a second level fight, that's pretty good. The other case is when you're going to hologram. I mean, you could just hologram back a 1-cost block or something that's useful, but you're oftentimes also going to hologram back something that costs 0, just because it already costs 1 to enable the hologram. So if you can hologram, an FTL and get draw, or a claw to make it stronger, it's okay. And I think upgraded, I might be inclined to go as high as a 2 here, but, I think it's a 1 early. Leap, on the other hand, I love this card. It's the most boring card I can imagine, but 9 block for free is like always pretty good, I think. It's a very high value card. Early on, I tend to like offense so that I can actually kill some of the elites on the first floor, but I will still take a leap over a lot of offensive cards. I think at the common level, is it the best common for the defect in the game? I don't feel comfortable saying that just yet, but I do think that, and it's also it's a decent upgrade target. I'd be inclined to say Leap is a 4. I'm always happy to see it. I buy this card all the time. And it's a block that I love to see. Rebound, on the other hand, I think we're back in 2 territory here. I do think the damage is fine. The effect is also fine. And you can use it if you got a Galaxy Brain. You can put a card that you want to play this turn on top of your draw pile, follow it up with, like a good example. Let me give you the way that you would maybe do this. You play Claw, and this is not uncommon. You play Claw, let me rephrase, start from 0. You play Rebound, you play Claw, you play FTL, you draw Claw. All of a sudden you've gotten, essentially 5 extra damage for free and made the Claw and all subsequent Claws better in the future. But it needs to be in the right shell. And even then, I don't think you're always very excited to draw it. I would be inclined to give it a 2. Don't shoot the messenger. Recursion. Another interesting card. I'm going to give it a 2 unupgraded and a 4 upgraded. It's very similar to Zap in the sense that, unupgraded, if you don't have any other options, you're not sad to play it. And of course, the real value of recursion, outside of, just what it says on the tin, is that if you recursion on a Dark Orb, it brings the Dark Orb back with the same charge that it already has. So you could do 45 damage, and then also have a Dark Orb come to the final slot with 45 damage, which is a trick that some people are unaware of. That makes recursion substantially better. And at 0, it's a no-brainer. Like, sometimes I'll take one of these in a focus deck just to be like, well, when we upgrade it, it's a free, 10 block or something, or it's a free 8 damage every time we draw it, which is pretty decent. So, if you're running a focus deck, you got the means to upgrade it. Maybe I would say this is a 4. If you're running a Dark Orb focus deck, this is probably a 5. Apart from that, probably a pass. Stack sucks. Okay, I'm open to being proven wrong about this, but I don't think this card is very good. It's a block that. Upgraded, it's 3 extra block. So you don't have to have too much in your discard pile to make it work for you. If you draw it on the second turn, realistically, this could be 10 block. And now I'm starting to talk myself into it. But if you draw it on the first turn, it could be, especially unupgraded, it could be like 2 block. And it's worth noting, pretty much all other blocks get +3. when they're upgraded. So it's not like, just because this says +3, don't be, you know, mind-flooded into believing that that's incredible, you know? I'd give this a 1. I basically never take it. Now, on dailies, it's a different story. Sometimes you just start with, like, 40 cards, you know? Then you look at this and you go, okay, I can understand that. Maybe if you play around it a little bit more, you can make it happen, but it's a 1 from me. Sorry, dog. Steam Barrier, on the other hand, I'm going to give a 4. And you're going to be like, what are you talking about? You never take this card. I have recently become aware of the value of Steam Barrier in my head, basically by talking myself through it. It's block for 0. What's the downside? It gets worse every time you play it, but it doesn't make all other Steam Barriers worse. So in my head, I'm like, oh man, you know, you play it for 0, but if you play it 2 times, all of a sudden you're only getting 4 block out of it the next time. Hear me out, a couple of things here. 4 block for 0 sounds very familiar. There's a card called Defect that we take in the silent, you know, probably at least 40% of the time. And then, and maybe that's why I'm losing as the silent, to be fair, if you have to play the same block more than 2 times over the course of a floor fight, you're probably, you know, you got bigger problems. So I think the amount of free block you get from this, and, you know, the upgrade is okay, but I still think it's very playable unupgraded. I give this a 4, and I take it, like, all the time now. Feel free to disagree on that one. It does also get drawn by All for One, by Scrape, but, you know, I think on its own merits alone, it's playable. Streamline, I'm going to give this a 2, and I've heard people talk about this card being better than you would think a 2 out of 5 is, but I just think it's too expensive to start with. I agree. I mean, you can't make it cost 1 and do 15 damage and reduce. It's just, that's not conceivable. It's too good. But it's kind of the same principle as Steam Barrier. By the time this comes around and costs 0, sure, you're getting 15 damage for 0, but the fight is probably almost over to begin with. The first time you play it is the worst. The second time you play it is good, and every subsequent time you play it is amazing. But I have very, very rarely managed to make this functional, just because I feel like in the, at least on high level Ascension, for the most part, if you're not killing enemies quickly, they're scaling too fast. And, you know, just because you're saving energy, you're probably still taking a buttload of damage on the front end. So, maybe I shouldn't be basing that on my experience, but what else have I got? So this is it's a 2 for me, dog, but every time you play it, it goes up 1. Sweeping Beam, I'm going to give it a 3, because there's not that many AoE options as the Defect. So this, just by virtue of being AoE and also giving you draw, I think is a card you don't dislike having 1 or even 2 of if you know what you're fighting in the future. So, you know, AoE, I've recently learned the value of it. Of course, if you get an Electrodynamics, you probably don't need this. And if you get a... hold on, let me find the card. I've forgotten the name of it. If you get Doom and Gloom, you probably don't necessarily need a Sweeping Beam either. But if you don't have those, because they show up at the rare and uncommon level, a Sweeping Beam is nice to handle some of the floor fights that will just body you. So I think this is a solid 3. Turbo is like, you have to use context here. Turbo is very bad if you don't have expensive cards. And it's very bad, I think, if the fight is going to go on for a long time. But it's extremely good. Like, it's a 5-star, I wouldn't say an auto take, but close, if you have Ice Cream. You gain 2 energy, you lose 1 energy later. So even if you just played this ended turn, drew the Void immediately, it'd still be 1 energy up for 0 cost. So I rarely take it, but I will take it in some circumstances if I have an expensive deck, or if I have Ice Cream. So, I mean, Void does still take up a card, but you get the idea. I would probably be inclined to give this a 2, but it's leaning towards a 1. Situationally much better. Aggregate, it's kind of the same boat. This is a daily card, in my opinion. It's extremely good. It's kind of the same as Turbo. You know, if you have Ice Cream, you're going to want to play this. You're going to love double energy as well. But if you're rolling an Ascension deck and it's a little tight, you know, paying 1 energy, you need to have at least 12 cards in your draw pile to get a reward out of that. I'd be inclined to say this is also a 2 that's a situational 4 or 5 as well. Auto shields, I'm going to give it a 4. There are situations where auto shields is unplayable and it gets ruined. What I'm thinking of is if you have a loop out there, which uses the effect of your rightmost orb at the start of your turn, and your rightmost orb is a frost orb, auto shields becomes a dead card. Apart from that, I mean, I guess the other options would be like, I don't know, self-forming clay, or you get the idea. Most of the time, this is going to be 11 block for 1, which is better than leap, which I already like, but I'm going to rate them at the same level because of the potential downsides. Would I rather have an auto shields or a leap? It's tough. I would probably rather have an auto shields, but it does show up less often. The other thing is, 1 in your deck is fantastic. With 2 of them in your deck, you run the risk of drawing them both on the same turn. So 1 of, extremely good. More than that, exercise caution, is my opinion. Blizzard, this one's going to get me in trouble. I think that Blizzard is a 1. I know. And it's... You might think that I've lost my mind, and what I've done is completely underrate the value of a Frost archetype. That's not correct. I love Frost as an archetype. I just very, very, very rarely... I mean, all of my wins from like A15 to A20 have come on Frost Focus, for sure. Very, very rarely has Blizzard been a card that has been important in making that happen. And that's all there is to say about it. You know, with Frost Focus, generating Frost is nice, but you don't need to endlessly generate Frost. And to be honest with you, having to generate 10 Frost to do 20 damage to all enemies, or 30 damage to all enemies, is the kind of thing, it's good on floor fights, but it takes so long to get to the point where it's solid AoE. That I think the cost, or the time at which it becomes useful is too late to be that valuable. And then beyond that, it's not like a Thunderstrike, for example, that's gonna, you know, do a crap load of damage to a single target boss, you know? Pretty much here, you're just stuck with a little middling damage, you know, 20 damage or 30 damage or even 50 damage sometimes to a boss. If it has 300 HP, it's not that good, especially when it requires you to play like 25 or 15 Frost Orbs over the past, I don't know, 10 turns to get to that point. So I'm open to being wrong on this one. I have had runs where it's been okay, but for the most part, even if... The reason I give it a 1 is because even when I build around Frost Focus, I feel like I don't think that this does enough for me. So many times I end up drawing it on like turn 3, and it does, you know, 8 damage to all enemies. Big whoop. You know, it's probably worse than a Sweeping Beam at that point because of the fact that it doesn't draw. Now it gets better later, but I just don't buy it. Boot Sequence, though, on the other hand, I do like it. It does take up a valuable draw, and of course the beta art is fantastic. It does take up a valuable draw on your first turn, which will probably leave you with 4 other cards. But having a guaranteed 10 block is very important if you're rolling a build that requires you to play a few other cards to get your defense going, i.e. Bias Cognition, Defrag, and something that summons Frost Orbs. So this is like a little... It's like taking a loan out from the block bank. You know, you say, hey, give me 10 block now until I can get on my own. And as a bonus, if you don't end up using it on the first turn, you don't need it, it can come back around and, you know, you can get basically 1 leap or 1 auto shields of value out of it. So I'd be inclined to give this a 4 as well. But again, much like auto shields, I don't want more than 1 because it makes my first turn a little bit too impotent. Bullseye, I'm going to give it a 2. Lock-on used to be different. It used to guarantee that orbs would hit a target. Now they receive 50% more damage from orbs. It's kind of the same situation as Blizzard, weirdly enough. In fact, I might be inclined to give this a 1, but I'm trying not to make too many enemies here. Maybe it still does guarantee that they get hit. I don't know. I don't take this card enough to be an authority on it, so thanks for watching. But the thing is, I just feel like if you're building Focus, you have better things to do with your energy than do 8 damage and make your lightning orbs do more damage. Or your Dark Orb even, I guess. Nah, yeah, you know, if you were trying to make a Dark Orb pop, I guess I could see the value here. But I still think it's a little tough to finesse. But I've never really tried it, so it's just theory crafting. And if you're not running a focus build, then this makes your lightning orbs do 1 more damage, i.e. I hit the snooze button. So I'll give it a 2, just for the latent potential of Dark Orbs against a single target foe. Capacitor. It's another 2, but it does... I'll add that one of my favorite combos in the game is Consume Capacitor. Especially upgraded, this card basically gets you 9 focus without losing orb slots. So I will often take Capacitor in the hopes that I get Consume. I will always take Capacitor if I have the money for it after I get Consume. Otherwise, it's not necessarily fantastic, I think, but it's still playable even outside of a focus build, I think, just for the extra space it gives you. Chaos is a bit of a funky one. Unupgraded, I would probably give it a 2. Some orbs are better than others, for sure. 1 energy for a single Frost Orb is terrible. 1 energy for a Lightning is also pretty terrible. 1 energy for a Dark Orb, there's another card in the game that already does that, and I still think it's not very good. 1 energy for a Plasma is decent. But it's definitely a 3 or maybe even a 4 when it's upgraded. Worst case scenario, 2 Lightning. Pretty good. You know, you get 6 damage per turn forever and probably evoke something. 2 Frost is fine. You know, in a focus build, it gets even better unless you're getting Plasma. But 2 Plasma, you'd already be happy with. So, I gave it a 2 to 3. Chill. I never take it. I just, I guess I underrate it because I can see the use case, but the number of times, it's kind of like Sweeping Beam, okay? So I'm going to give it a 2 instead of Sweeping Beam's 3 because its effect is more guaranteed over here. But against floor fights, sure, you're probably going to get 1 or 2 or 3 Frost. Against bosses, you're usually going to get 1 Frost. Who cares? 1 Frost for 0 is a card I would rather not even draw. At least until I have focus coming in later. But again, if I have like 8 focus, I probably got cool heads, cold snaps, etc., etc. So personally, I think this card is overrated, but what do I know? Consume. It's a 5. No contest in my world. I will take a Consume always. Getting orb slots is relatively easy. There's a relic that does it. There's a power that does it. I mean, that's about it. But, you know, if you go to enough shops, you're pretty likely to find a capacitor on any given run. Consume is like, I will always take it. Especially if it shows up in the first 2 floors. The ability to gain 3 focus, I mean, I'm not going to belabor the point with arithmetic. But if you have 3 Frost Orbs at base level focus, that's 6 block. You play this, now you have 2 Frost Orbs. And instead of 6 block, you have 10 block. So just by doing this, you've gained 4 block per turn forever. Extremely important that you can play it multiple times. So as long as you keep getting fed orb slots, you can get 3 focus every time this comes around. This is the linchpin of any focus build, I think. Even more so than Bias Cognition. I give it a 5. Ignore it at your own risk. Darkness. I hate it as far as cards go. But I never roll Darkness builds. So I'd give this like a question mark out of 5. I love that it has an effect that's interesting. It's a unique effect for sure, but 1 Darkness for an orb that does nothing immediately is very slow. Now, if it can accelerate your deck to the point that things start to pop, that's great too. I'm going to say that Defrag is another 5, but it's a slightly lesser 5 than Consume in my opinion. Upgraded, it gives you the same effect as an unupgraded Consume, with no downside. It's very good. For 1 energy, I mean, this is 6 extra block. Per turn, forever. You know? Plus, you know, you get extra value on every evoke and blah, blah, blah. Even for 1 focus, it's fine, but a little bit slower. I will almost always take this. And I will take more than 1 for sure, if given the opportunity. Doom and Gloom. I would be inclined to give this perhaps surprisingly, a 4. Despite not respecting Dark Orbs maybe as much as I should, a single Doom and Gloom accomplishes 2 purposes, especially early on in a run. It has AoE, which I've already established, I hope, is a little rare as the Defect. But beyond that, even just having a single Dark Orb has given me so many victories against first floor bosses that otherwise probably would have bodied me. The ability to do 100 damage off of a dual casted Dark Orb is not uncommon, and you know, if you have a deck that otherwise is just slowly dying to the Slime, for example, or even the Guardian, this is really, really good. So I will take one of these early, always. Late, maybe not. I mean, it's expensive as well, and I don't think the upgrade is actually that good if you're rolling Focus, but one of these early can make a big difference, so I'll give it a 4. Double Energy, I mean, I would give this a 4 as well, and I think it kind of explains itself. It's better if you have Ice Cream. You probably would like some draw to make it work as well, but I'm almost always happy to have one of these in my deck. Equilibrium. It's a 2 for me, dog. I have been known to take this under duress if we have not gotten other blocks in the deck, either, you know, like I haven't taken them or they haven't shown up. I will take an Equilibrium. 13 block for 2 is not horrendous, and the extra effect is potentially good if maybe you're holding on to something that you definitely want to play next turn. But certainly, I mean, if you have the choice between an Equilibrium or an Auto Shields and a Leap, you know what you're going to play for the same energy cost. That's why it's a little lower here. FTL, I'm going to give this a 4. Again, it's a card that I feel like always adds to your deck. Even if the effect is not that valuable, and it can be, you know, any zero-cost attack makes you probably exponentially more likely to pick up something like a, you know, a Kunai trigger or a Shuriken trigger or an Ornamental Fan trigger. As long as you play it early-ish, you're doing 5 damage and replacing FTL with something else. So it's basically like a prepared that also does 5 damage and affects only itself. Where am I going with this? Anyway, the only time you don't like it is when you can only play X number of cards, like Velvet Choker, or if you have Pain or something in your hand, so every time you play a card, you know, this guy, you're going to take 1 HP loss, or maybe you're against the Timekeeper, but every other time, I love having an FTL. And there's not a whole lot more satisfying in the Defect deck than like FTL drawing an FTL that draws you a Claw or something like that, that gets you, you know, an all-for-one that, you know, you get the idea. Even though you don't get the trigger on the subsequent ones. Force Field's very interesting. I would give this a 3 because it's an average between a 1 and a 5. You know pretty much right out of the gate if Force Field's going to be a card for you, you know? Are you playing Creative AI? Are you playing Many Powers? Do you have stuff that gives you the energy base for that? Either Energy Relics or Mummified Hand, etc., etc. If so, you're oftentimes going to pay 1 for Force Field, or you're going to pay 0 for the rest of the fight. It's very, very good. The rest of the time, it's untakeable. If you play 1 power, you're not going to pay 3 energy for a block. So if you're rolling the power build, this is mission critical and is a 5-star card. If you're not, and you don't have a big power base to begin with, you probably don't care about Force Field, and it's like a literal 1. Fusion, I never take it. Upgraded, I shouldn't say never. I very rarely take it. Upgraded, it's good, and I mean, it passes the smell test. Pay 1 energy to get 1 energy every subsequent turn, and then, you know, 2 energy when you evoke it. But it's just, again, on Ascension 20, I've really tailored my playstyle to stuff that gives you an immediate benefit whenever possible. And if it doesn't give you an immediate benefit, it's got to be incredible. You know, like I mean, this isn't a Defect card, but like Demon Form. As the Defect, you know, you give me the choice between a 2 energy fusion or even a 1 energy fusion and a Wraith Form. I know what I'm playing. Even though the Wraith Form is more expensive, the value we get out of it is just ridiculous. So I actually think the fusion kind of sucks. I would maybe stop short of giving it a 1, but it's close. Let's call it a 2. Genetic Algorithm, it's situation dependent, but I've really come around on this card. I think I would give it a 4. It's way worse if you get it at the, you know, let's say past the halfway point of the second floor. But if you get this early on, and it doesn't even have to be one of your first few card rewards. If you get it before the boss fight on the first floor, I think I am now in the always take camp. You only have to play it twice for it to get to the point where it's as good as a basic block. And that still sucks, but from that point onwards, it just gets better and better. You know, a genetic algorithm, it's kind of like Impervious in the Ironclad deck, although cheaper, but starts way worse. Even if you don't have the spoon that will maybe stop a card from exhausting, having the ability to pay 1 energy and maybe get 22 block, or I guess that's not possible, let's say 23 block, once is huge. It's huge. It's like having it's like healing for that much, almost. So I'd be inclined to say that this card is very good. It does start bad, though. Glacier is, I mean, I was thinking maybe I'd stop short of giving it a 5, but no. I think this is a 5-star. I will always take it. It's not 7 block. It's 11 block, for 1. And then, well, for 2, haha. And then it gives you at least 4 block per turn forever. In a Frost Focus build, it's even better, but this gives you gas early. It puts up a wall that enemies find it hard to get through. On 820, they're still probably going to damage you, but, I mean, you got 1 energy left to do something with. It's very, very good. Eventually, and this is just me trying to sound like a smartass, basically, but eventually you're probably going to hit the point where you don't want glaciers. You know, I don't mean like in the scope of the game. I mean like if you're on turn 20 against a boss, you're probably not going to care about 7 block, and you've probably got enough frost, but early on the base is very valuable. Heat sinks, I actually think this is like a 2. I think it sucks, obviously, unless you're rolling the power build. It sucks to get it out of a power potion. You can never take this, and this is why I hate that it's at the uncommon level. You would probably never take this as your first power, and I mean, it's very easy to construct a perfect world scenario where this card is amazing, and I have thought that in the past. You know, if you get Mummified Hand, Creative AI, and a bunch of powers, you know, and you got Storm, and, you know, you get the idea, then Heat Sinks is amazing. You know, you play a power, you play Heat Sinks, you draw a power, you play it, you draw a card, you know, it just never ends. You play your whole hand for free. But this is like the last piece of the puzzle. It's very, very situational. I'll give it a 2 because there is a use for it, but I'll level with you. I kind of think Hello World is like a -1. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the benefit of Hello World. It is 1 extra draw per turn, but it's a random common that is not necessarily part of the deck that you've been rolling, and it's going to stay and clog up your deck. I'll give it a 1, and maybe this card's above my intellectual weight class, and you know what? That's fine too. But I don't like it basically at all. Loop, on the other hand, it's a 3, I think. Maybe a 4 if you've got a great Frost Focus build running. You know, again, let's just say realistically you're 6 focus up. This is 8 block per turn via loop, or 16 block. Or maybe you've got lightning orbs out there, in which case, you know, this is now 9 or 18 damage for 0, which is really good. Plus, synergizes with powers if you're trying to build that. Melter is like another 4, and it's a 4 situationally, because the damage is not that good, but the ability to remove block from the enemy is unbelievably valuable. So many enemies, especially on the second floor, I'm thinking specifically of the big ball, you know, they put up 50 block by turn 2. This removes all block and takes them down to half HP. I will always take one of those if the opportunity strikes, just specifically to deal with those fights that otherwise probably will mill you for like 20 HP. So I think this is a 4 for at least one of them. I hate Overclock. I think there's other draw engines as the Defect, Cold Snap, Sweeping Beam, FTL. The negative is not necessarily that bad, but the more you play it, the worse it gets, obviously. It does cost 0, but For the most part, I don't really like this, but maybe if you're rolling a zero-cost deck, you could work it. I rarely take it. I'd be inclined to give it a 1. Recycle is a 2, because I respect it. The problem with it unupgraded is that you're really only using it to remove a card from your deck. So you're paying 1 energy to cut a basic strike, or a basic defend, or maybe a curse that's not a Sender's Bane. It's not no effect, but it's not much effect. When it's upgraded, it will give you energy back even if you exhaust the 1-cost card. That makes it a little better. But still, you gotta be careful with this. Reinforced body, I'll give it a 3. Hello, Tomo. It's getting hot in here, right? You wanna go? Fair enough. Reinforced body, I'm gonna give it a 3. In the same way that you want a big attack most of the time to take out elites or bosses, you want a big block as well. Now, the danger is it has to show up on the right turn, but it's very playable, I think, especially upgraded. It only gets 2 block per X, but it's still pretty good. And I think having the ability to, play this versus a big attack from, a large slime or, the Guardian, not the Guardian. Well, even against the Guardian, it's fine. Or, I'm thinking of the Knight on the second floor that hits really hard. Having one of these and, I guess drawing it at the right opportunity is good. I'll give it a 3. Reprogram is like a 1 for me. Sure, I get it. The ability to be like, hey, I don't need these cards next turn, and ensure that you're guaranteed to draw some cards and more likely to draw other cards that might be more useful than the stuff that you're discarding is good, but it taking up a slot in your hand scares me. So I give it a 1. Rip and Tear. I'm going to give it a 2 leaning towards 3. Early, you really are starved for damage sources, so I think having the ability to do 14 damage, even if it's not to the enemies you like, it's good. Later, not so much. Let's go with 2. Scrape is one of those cards that's archetypical, right? If you have many zero-cost cards and you want to get them ASAP, cough, cough, claw, then this is a card you're definitely going to take, at least one of. If you don't have that specific archetype, it's basically 7 damage for 1 energy, and then you put a bunch of stuff in your discard pile. So, I'm going to give it a 2, mercifully. Don't say that I do not show mercy. I'm just looking at how many cards remain. Oh my god, we should be going so much faster. Self-repair. I will admit I overrate this card probably, but I would be inclined to give it a 4. I will always add it. I think it works. I'll always add 1, I should say. I think it works very, very well, especially if you have an Echo form, and especially if you have a lot of block. And if you have a lot of block, it's a bit of a paradox because you're not that likely to need a self-repair. But by playing self-repair with an Echo form, you have the luxury, if you have Frost Focus, to wait. You can just stall and then make sure you hit the trigger on this one and heal for 14. But admittedly, that's like a rich get richer situation. Skim, I rarely take it unless I'm rolling a zero-cost build, so I'd probably be inclined to give it a 2. But I do underrate Draw to begin with. Oh, I clicked off the screen again. Static Discharge is a very interesting one. I will give this a 4, even though I don't take it that often. Why? What buffers it up to that point? Well, it's extremely great against the heart, which I haven't even talked about, but against the heart, this is like your Caltrops in order to body it. Which means it's also great against any enemy that does multiple attacks that don't do very much damage. So, the birds get destroyed, the Guardian gets destroyed, the Hexaghost gets destroyed. And this could realistically, in the early game, or even in the late game, be your single biggest damage dealer. The upgrade, it makes it twice as good. This is a mission critical card that has the luxury of being a power that also works in non-power decks. And if you get this plus Tori, you can get you can get 8 damage from Lightning Evokes, or even 16 damage from Lightning Evokes from getting hit for 1, which is amazing. Storm is it's a 2 or a 5, right? It might even be a 1 or a 5. Because in a power deck, you need to have this card. It's going to be one of your main ways of dealing damage. Well, you don't need it, because, I mean, in theory, you could just get 6 Echo Forms out of Creative AI or something, but you're likely to want it. In a non-power deck, you know, you're probably paying 1 for Storm, which does nothing, and then, you know, 1 more for X other power. Let's say it's Defrag, that gives you 1 Lightning. You've gotten a base level zap out of it. So you need to have, like, 4 or 5 powers in your deck, in my opinion, for this to start to be more useful. Which, again, makes it hard, kind of like Heat Sinks, in order to be one of the first cards that you would add. So, I'm not going to say it can't work, because it obviously can, but it's an inconsistent deck meta, in my opinion. Sunder. Early, very good. Maybe even 4 level, and a good upgrade target as well. Mid-game, I'd be inclined to keep it at a 4, because if you get an Energy Relic, it's very easy to imagine a situation where you, like, attack, Sunder lethals them, you get the 3 energy back, and then you play the rest of your turn. I'd be inclined to say this is a 3. 24 damage for 3 is not that remarkable, depending on the way you build your run, but the probability of getting the energy back, especially if you can get to 4 energy so you can play something else, is really good. So I'd be inclined to give it a 3. Tempest is interesting. I'd give this a 3 as well. It's basically like a pay what you want zap, but I think it's you really, this doesn't thrive, in my opinion, in a deck that tries to summon as much lightning as possible. You know, it doesn't thrive in a deck with ball lightnings and zaps and etc. I think it thrives in a deck that creates plasma orbs. So the real, the Wombo combo for Tempest is like a 200 IQ sort of situation, I think, where you want to multicast a Plasma Orb, or dual cast a Plasma Orb, hopefully play an aggregate, a double energy, something along those lines, and then Tempest, you know, if you can cast it for 5, 6, 7, above that, you know, now it's an incredible finisher. So if you can finesse that, you know, more power to you. Otherwise, I'd be inclined to keep it at a 3. The ability to be flexible with it is very nice. You know, you could cast it for 1 or even 0 if you've got like a letter opener or something, but you gotta have the right shell to make it work. White Noise is interesting. I'd be inclined to give it a 4. Honestly, the 1 random power for 1 is fine by me. The worst case scenario is probably that you get a Hello World. And if you get a Biased, a Buffer, an Echo Form, a Defrag, a Loop, you know, you're probably going to be pretty pleased. I guess you could get a Storm, and that would be useless as well. But and at 0, for sure, I love it. It's inconsistent, so I'll take 1 point off, but I do think it's a 4. You know, you can't choose what you get, I mean. All for One, it's archetype specific. So again, it's a, you know, bimodal distribution. It's like a 1 if you don't roll 0 cost cards except maybe an upgraded zap, and it's a 5 if you're building around it. You know, it's a feast or famine card. If you got claws, steam barriers, beam cells, go for the eyes, 0 cost zaps, cards that have been hit by madness and now you can draw them again. FTLs, you need this, especially claws, to be able to play them more frequently. Otherwise, you're paying, you know, even optimistically, you're paying 2 energy for 10 damage, or 14, which is still not great, and probably getting 1 card back, you know, either a zap or, you know, something that costs 0 for you. Maybe a boot sequence if you're lucky. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not giving it a 1, I'm not giving it a 5, I'm giving it a 1 and a 5. Amplify. This card kind of sucks, in my opinion. There is an exception. I put my hand in my mouth because that's what this guy's doing. Ricola. There are exceptions to the rule, which is why I'm going to give it a 2. If you get very lucky and you draw Amplify and powers that are worth doubling, life is but a dream. Or if you have an upgraded Seek, it's very good to be able to grab Amplify plus a power of your choice. You know, an amplified upgraded buffer. Disgusting. You're not getting hit the next 4 times you get hit. An amplified bias cognition. You know, you're getting 8 focus. You're going to lose 2 per turn, but you got 8 focus for a while, which is probably enough to kill most floor fights. But if you're relying on random chance, be forewarned. I don't believe in it. Bias Cognition. It's a 5-star card that I wanted to give 4, but I will always take it. If we don't have an archetype for claw or 0-cost cards settled early on, I will always take Biased if offered on the first boss fight. There's one caveat. Floor fights, I think you always play it ASAP. Right off the bat. Boss fights, you have to wait and pop it at the right moment. And if your whole run hinges on getting Biased out there to do a lot of damage, that could mean that bosses will ruin you. So it's not a cure-all, but it's extremely great when it comes to crushing floor fights. Also, the losing one focus is bad, but if you can get a consume that allows you to maintain some equilibrium at your newfound focus level is quite good. So I love this card. I'm going to give it a 5. Buffer, I'm going to give a 4. It's so good, and there's not many cards in the game that can, you know, especially upgraded, block 130 damage for you for 2 energy, right? However, there is and the positives of Buffer speak for themselves. So that's why it's ended up at a 4. Why is it not a 5? The number of times where just mathematically, arithmetically, you end up getting kind of screwed over by a buffer. You know, if you choose not to play the buffer, you take 6 damage. If you play the buffer, you take like 1 damage. Or you would block 1 damage is what I mean. Sometimes you end up paying... Well, you end up with a cursed choice. You either pay 2 energy to block an insignificant amount of damage, or you don't pay 2 energy, Buffer gets recycled somewhere and hopefully comes back on a more useful turn, but you take the damage that otherwise Buffer would have blocked. So it's not always playable, but I do think that it's very, very good, especially upgraded. Core Surge, I'd be inclined to give this a 5 as well. The only thing is, it's a 5 on merit, but if given the choice between a Core Surge, a Bias Cognition, an Echo Form, and Electrodynamics on a boss fight, you probably don't take Core Surge most of the time. It doesn't define your run. But on merit alone, 11 damage and an artifact for 1 is extremely good. It blocks Frail from enemies that'll body you. It blocks the loss of focus from Bias Cognition, you know? This is a card especially if it shows up as a card reward, you're thrilled. On the boss rewards, sometimes I'm 50-50, but it's very good. I'd give it a 5 on merit. When you draw it, you play it. Creative AI. It's fun. Let's give it a 3. It's expensive, but it gets cheaper. If you have any power-focused relics, it's much better. Otherwise... I mean, it's just filling up your deck with stuff you probably can't afford to play. But it can be fun, for sure. And early, I mean, if you could make it work early. The only problem is, early on, spending your whole turn's energy playing this and then getting hit for like 10 or 15. But anyway. Echo Form is another 5. I know I'm giving out a lot of 5s. The Defect has a lot of cards that can win you the game in the right circumstances. The ideal way to get Echo Form is by playing a white noise for free, but most of the time that's not going to happen. The downside of it being ethereal is not even that bad, in my opinion, because when it shows up, there's 2 situations, in my opinion. You either play it and deal with the cost of getting hit if you don't have any extra energy, or you don't play it because you have a better line, and then you go, oh well, at least we don't have to see it again on a turn when we won't have enough energy to play it. So and then, of course, it doubling every first card you play for the rest of the game, as long as you pay attention to it, is admittedly extremely game-changing. It's a 5 for me, dog. Electrodynamics is a 5 as well. I will stand by this as the best AoE. Even if you're rolling like a claw build, Electrodynamics, assuming you have your starting relic, basically, you're doing 9 damage for free. Well, I mean, you pay 2 on the turn, but you're doing 9 damage to every enemy every turn. Evoking does 16 damage to every enemy, plus another 6 on top of that from the other 2 orbs that remain. And it doesn't even warrant an upgrade, which in its own way is kind of nice. You know, it's not a card that requires any extra investment. We're getting close to the end here. I will always take an Electro. We're out of 5-star range temporarily, by the way. Fission's very interesting. Its effect, I think, puts it at a 3, but I'm gonna say thanks to its rarity, it's almost like a 2 here. Also, I don't respect anybody that shoots a lightning orb out of their genitals. So, what do I mean by this? This is the exact opposite of Electrodynamics. It's a card that I really think you need to upgrade to find it useful in most situations. Now, upgraded, it's incredible. You evoke all of your orbs, and then not only are you evoking them for free, you're getting the energy back from each one of them, and also drawing a card. So, let's just, on a bad use case, you got base level focus, 2 frost, 1 lightning. You do 8 damage, you gain 10 block, you gain 3 energy, and you draw 3 cards. Now, you can only do it once, but that sets you up to basically, it's like a blue card in Magic the Gathering that lets you take a second turn, Unupgraded, you just lose the orbs, which you can't really do. You can't afford to do on a focus build, So what do you use this for? It's kind of like a get out of jail free card is the best case scenario. Oh crap, my draw sucks. I can remove a couple of orbs and maybe get stuff that'll help me immediately. It's not horrible necessarily, but it's not very good. So, I think if you can upgrade it real quick, it's like a 4. But I think it's a 2 in most situations. Hyper Beam is very interesting. Gonna ruffle some feathers here. Hyper Beam, I'm gonna give a 2. But if it's an early card reward, or you start with this card via like Neo's Blessing or whatever, you can build around it. You just would build something that doesn't give you focus. Because even with Panacea or Core Surge, blocking the loss of 3 focus is ideal, but it still is going to get you eventually. You can't have this and play it in a build that also has a focus on gaining more focus. It's like Immolate in the Ironclad deck has a negative effect. It has almost the same damage. It has a negative effect. The negative effect is like 1/8 as bad as losing 3 focus to get a burn in your deck. So, there's no doubt it's the single best AoE from a damage perspective, although I think Electrodynamics has better long-term optics for sure. But, and it makes it insanely good for the first floor. That's why I say if you get this on your first few rewards, take it and just, roll like an attack-focused build instead. Because in my experience, you're not going to perfect world this card. You're not going to, always draw Core Surge first and then get to keep your focus. So you got to choose the archetype for sure. But if you get it late, it's untakeable in my opinion. But I'll give it a 2. With the added caveat that it can obviously be better. Machine Learning, it's like, again, I'm going to give it a 2. It is good. The effect is great, actually. The only thing is, it doesn't do anything for you immediately, and unless it has a latent, incredible benefit, this is the recurring theme of these reviews, I guess, it's very hard to justify playing it. Like, on paper, drawing 1 extra card per turn is probably worth more than just playing a basic block, but it's hard to justify that when you got 3 energy and an enemy's, early on is looking like he's going to hit you in the face for 20 damage. So, if you can, if you have a power deck, you take it, but obviously. And I've taken it in non-power decks, but I really do think, it's at its best if you have more energy to work with the effect on subsequent turns. I don't know where I feel about Machine Learning. Meteor Strike is amazing if you get it for free. Otherwise, it's very tough to play. You basically have to have a shell, especially early, where you can actually get this out there. You need to have a Madness. You need to get it off of a trigger from a Mummified Hand, or you need to be able to have the kind of plasma that you can evoke. Now, if you can cast it once, you can cast it again, because it more than pays for itself, as long as it channels at least, if it channels 2 orbs, you pay 1 for 24 damage. And you get your energy back, which is amazing. But it's just so hard to cast in the first place. I'd be inclined to start by giving this one a 2. Multicast. I think you could say that this is a 4. The dream scenario, as mentioned, is you're gonna either use multicast to give you the energy to then use a Tempest or something along those lines, or you're gonna multicast, or you're going to get your own energy base up via aggregate double energy, and then you're going to multicast a lightning for like, 12, which is obviously extremely good. So I think it's playable in most situations, and it doesn't exhaust, which makes it even better. I'd be inclined to say this is a 4 that you could fit into most archetypes. Rainbow's like a 3. It's like the card I'm least excited to be happy to get. You get one of everything except Plasma. The upgrade is nice, and I mean, the second time you play it, you're doing damage, you're gaining 5 block, and you're probably doing 8 damage as well, along with the passive benefits, but I think it's fine. Reboot, it's also fine. It's a little situationally. The problem with Reboot is that you're rare from the boss. You don't want it to be a Reboot. You want it to be something that kickstarts you to the next level, right? Echo Form. Bias Cognition, Electrodynamics, even a Meteor Strike maybe. You don't want it to be, give me another chance at my first draw. But if you get it from another capacity, I think it's fine. Seek is a 5-star almost by definition, with the added benefit that, or the added caveat I should say, that you, again, it's probably not what you want from your boss, unless you already have gotten a rare, or you have an archetype that allows you to win if you can seek out the money cards. So, with an upgrade, it's even better. In the end, it's 0, and it can be anything in your deck that isn't in your discard pile. Or it could be any 2 things. And the combos enabled by upgrading it are definitely huge. So, I mean, I would, again, it's a 4 or a 5. I think it's a 5 from a playable standpoint, maybe a 4 from a takeable standpoint, considering where it's most likely to show up and the cards that it's going to compete against. But anyway. Thunderstrike, for me, that's a 2. I think I rarely, and I might have blinders on here. I don't think a build that summons a bunch of lightning is good enough consistently to beat second and third floors on high level ascensions. So what this means is that you have a build that already, it just summons lightning kind of latently, and then you maybe play this for value. I don't know, it's so expensive. Maybe I'm wrong, but when I go focus, I tend to build Frost just because block, it seems king, If you can put up 80 block per turn via Frost Orbs, which is not inconsistent or unlikely, I would rather do that than output 80 damage, because 80 block per turn essentially means we'll never die. 80 damage, we could still die just due to 1 or 2 bad turns. So it suffers from, I think, there not being enough support for a Lightning Shell. But, I don't know. I would give it a 2 just because I'm ignorant. There's my reviews. What are my favorite cards as the Defect? Well, I mean, I love Focus. So I'd be inclined to say that my favorite Defect card is Consume. It has a cost, so it's kind of interesting, but it has an incredible benefit. And if you get the shell to work with, it's easy to win. The A20 run I had was easy. There was no math. The only math is how many Frost Orbs can I play this turn? You need orb slots, but once you get those, you're good. I love Defrag, but it's a little bit more low-key. Glacier's very great. Bias Cognition is wonderful. Echo Form is wonderful. Electrodynamics is wonderful. I love all those cards. Let me know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Post your essays on Reddit. That's right. I checked the Slay the Spire subreddit. There is no escape from my prying eyes. If you disagree, it's cool. Doesn't bother me at all. Hopefully we can all learn something via the analysis. But just remember that I'm uniquely qualified to review all the cards as the Defect in the game, because I've beaten Ascension 20 one time. For now, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the episode, I'm sweating here. Click the like button. Appreciation helps me a great deal. And of course, subscribe if you want to see more in the future. Follow me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Northernlion to be notified of when I go live in the future. And check back at 9 a.m. Pacific time every day for new Slay the Spire episodes as I try to finally beat Ascension 20 with all characters on camera. For now, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Or you've been entertained by your own annoyance in your disagreements with me. And I'll see you next time. See ya.